The night was unusually silent. The tall pillars of the royal palace were lit by burning torches, their flames casting long, frightening shadows across the stone walls. The royal court stood frozen, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a decision that would change everything. The silence was broken by the king's heavy, commanding voice. "Do you accept my proposal?" The girl standing before him was named Era. She was not a princess, nor did she belong to any powerful or noble family. She was an ordinary young woman, dressed simply, yet there was something in her eyes, something fearless, that even the most seasoned warriors in the court lacked. Era lifted her head and looked directly into the king's eyes. No, for a moment time itself seemed to stop. Ministers exchanged shocked glances. Soldiers tightened their grip on their swords. No one in the history of the kingdom had ever dared to refuse the king so openly. The king's face turned red with rage. "Do you understand what you've just said?" he thundered. Era did not lower her gaze. "I spoke the truth," she replied calmly. "Marriage is a choice, not a command. It cannot be forced through fear." Those words sealed her fate. By the next morning, the entire city echoed with an announcement. Era was declared a traitor to the crown, accused of insulting the king and threatening the stability of the kingdom. The people were never told the truth. They were only told that she had committed an unforgivable crime. She was dragged through narrow stone corridors beneath the palace and thrown into an underground mine prison, a place from which no one ever returned. It was dark, damp, and filled with the smell of decay. Time lost all meaning there. Days and nights blended into endless suffering. Water dripped from cracked ceilings. Chains scraped against stone. The air was heavy with despair. In the corner of that darkness sat a man who barely looked alive. His body was strong, marked by scars, but his eyes were empty. His name was Kael. Once, Kael had been the kingdom's greatest warrior. He had led armies, defended borders, and shed blood in the king's name. He had saved countless lives and won countless battles. But during one disastrous war, when the enemy surrounded them and defeat was certain, the king fled the battlefield to save himself. The army was abandoned. To protect his image, the king blamed Kael. Labeled a traitor, stripped of honor, Kael was chained and thrown into the same underground prison he now called home. Kael noticed Era when she was brought in, but he said nothing. He had learned that silence was the only way to survive. Days passed. Era was weak and injured, yet she refused to surrender to despair. She shared her water with prisoners who were dying of thirst. She cleaned wounds with trembling hands. At night, she whispered prayers into the darkness, not just for herself, but for everyone trapped there. Kael watched her in disbelief. One day he finally spoke. "Why do you do this?" he asked quietly. "No one remembers kindness in a place like this." Era smiled faintly, her face pale but determined. "If I give up my humanity," she said, "then those who put us here win." Her words struck Kael deeper than any blade ever had. Something inside him, something he thought had died long ago, stirred. One night, chaos erupted. Fire broke out in the mine. Smoke spread rapidly, choking the air. Prisoners screamed and banged on iron doors, begging for help. Above them, guards sealed the exits and walked away, leaving everyone to die. "We are not here to die," Era shouted through the smoke. Kael clenched his fists. For the first time in years, fire burned in his eyes again. He pulled against his chains. Iron strained, then snapped. Sparks flew as he tore himself free. With raw strength, Kael smashed the weakened wall. Stones collapsed, opening a narrow path to freedom. One by one, prisoners escaped through the smoke-filled darkness. Era was the last to leave. She turned back and looked at Kael. "You're not alone anymore," she said. They vanished into the night. The days that followed were brutal. They ran through forests, crossed mountains, survived hunger and exhaustion. Along the way, Era learned the truth about Kael, his loyalty, his betrayal, and the injustice he had endured. And Kael learned something too. Era was not just brave, she was hope. When the king learned of their escape, his fury shook the palace. He sent soldiers across the kingdom to hunt them down. The city gathered when Era finally returned, standing before the people who had been lied to for so long. Era spoke without fear. She revealed the king's cowardice, his lies, and his cruelty. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Doubt replaced blind loyalty. Kyle stepped forward, sword in hand, not for power, not for revenge, but for justice. The battle was fierce. Steel clashed. Dust and blood filled the air. In the end, the king fell. His crown hit the ground, cracked and forgotten. Era refused the throne. Power does not live in a crown, she said. It lives in truth. Kyle laid down his sword. For the first time, he no longer needed it. The kingdom changed. Laws were rewritten. Voices once silenced were finally heard. And the people learned a lesson that would echo through generations. Sometimes a single refusal is enough to change an entire kingdom.